May be seated. A number of years ago, Bruce attended a funeral, Mrs. McKinley, and at that funeral he heard a hymn. And anyway, he right then, that the decision was made that day that when this day came for him, he wanted that hymn sung. And so that is the hymn that we'll hear now, Fruit of the Spirit.
And love and the life that shall be like unto thine, Savior divine. Give of the fruit of the Spirit to me, then I shall say, this is mine. Nothing is mine if I must leave it here, when I have ended my earthly career. Filled with the fruit of the Spirit divine, this I shall say is mine.
We would bow in prayer. Our Father, we're very fortunate to know you as the living, eternal God. And when we come and are aware of, again, of the brevity of life, and that everything that we hold dear and value and work for, that it so soon comes to an end, it's very sobering and could even cause us to question life, and seems like such a fleeting and passing thing. But we're thankful that you're eternal, and even in creation you've shown us things that are beyond human ability, and just proof again to us that there is a God that thinks about us and a God that's planned for us. And we're thankful for the day that the gospel story came to us, and we learned that there was far more than just the creation around us, but there was a divine love and a work that you and only you could do in the lives of men and women. And so it's today that we can come even with thankfulness that even in Bruce you were able to work something that was eternal. And while we ask for your comfort today, and as each would feel a loss in a different way and measure, we're thankful that there's no sorrow for Bruce's soul or a doubt of what he loved in this life and what he lived for in eternity. And so it is with the comfort that we come. We're thankful that your Holy Spirit is not limited and that it can reach everyone and bring a comfort and can say words that are impossible for us even to know to say, and even just simply a feeling of peace in even difficult times. And so we just pray that you would guide the words spoken here today, and even more that there would be a feeling of comfort that could come from you. We ask all these favors in Jesus' name. Amen. Now Esther will speak.
I count it a great privilege to be here today, and I have counted it a great privilege to have known Bruce for the last 5 years, and I've watched Bruce and Edna. The relationship that they had between one another was very, very special. Where one was, the other was. And I've also witnessed the relationship that Bruce and Edna have had with their Lord, and it's very precious. The table in their kitchen often had a Bible open at one end that was Bruce's, and a Bible open on the other end that was Edna's. And that was a part of their daily feeding. They had meals at that table too, but that was just for the body. But they were feeding their soul, what will go beyond with them. In the 116th Psalm, it says that precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. And we don't usually think of death being anything so desirable from Earth's standpoint, from our standpoint, but from God's standpoint, it's very precious. He's had fellowship with Bruce, and he's helped Bruce. He's given Bruce strength. Jesus has been interceding for Bruce at God's right hand. And to God, it's like there's one of his little ones who's made it safely to the other shore. And that's very precious in his sight. And to us on the earth, it's more like loss. Right before the service, Darren said he heard one of the great grandchildren say, "Where's Pap?" It's a loss to her. She doesn't have her grandfather anymore, great-grandfather. And their grandchildren, they don't have their grandfather anymore. The children don't have their father anymore. Edna doesn't have her husband, her best friend, anymore. So all we can see is maybe the loss, but it's a great gain to heaven. There's a brother that was speaking at a funeral one time, and he just mentioned that it's so easy for us to get taken up with the departure when there is a beautiful arrival at the other shore. And we're thankful that we can see a little bit of that. We've been given a little glimpse of what is beyond, and that's what we're living for. That's the goal that we're aiming at. Just before Bruce died, I'm not sure if it was 1 day or 2 days before he died, he sent a text, and in his text he said something like, "If he's ready, I'm ready. And if he's not ready, I still want to be ready. And it just reminded me of what Paul said in 2 Timothy in the 4th chapter. He said, "For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing." And we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Bruce loved the gospel. He loved everything about the gospel. And I feel like he loved the thought of going on to be with his Lord and Master. This verse also says something about the faithful, and Paul calling him, saying about himself that he had kept the faith. And really, when I have thought about Bruce, I thought, what one word would I use to describe him? And it's faithful. We're very glad for the faithful of the land, those who have been faithful that we can look to and that have been such a help and an inspiration to us. And we want to look to Bruce for an example. Even though he's gone, his example will live on, and we're grateful for that.
And Edna asked if I might have a little part in this service today. My mind flooded with memories and with appreciation, because Edna and Bruce have been very kind to me, and they've done for me what I couldn't do for myself. And so I thought, maybe I could do something for them today and just have a little word in this service. Bruce's voice is silent today, but I could speak a word for him. We have had an unusual number of deaths, and because of that, an unusual number of funerals. And it makes us sober. And I've thought a lot about life, because this is the time when we get ready for death. The scripture says in Hebrews 9, as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. For Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. There are things that we do once. We die. It is appointed unto men once to die, and after that the judgment. That's when we give account of what we have done in this life. And it also says that there will be a resurrection, and that is of the just and of the unjust. So none of us escape. We don't escape death. We don't escape the resurrection. We don't escape the judgment. I've been thinking a lot about life. It's full of new experiences. And we need help. We need a guide. We need a counselor. And it tells us of God sending Jesus to be that for us. I can remember times when Bruce talked about their life from the beginning. And when they decided to spend their life together, they were poor. And that was not uncommon. But together, between the two of them, they pooled their money to get a license and to pay for the judge. And that's the way it's been. They've lived together. And the one thing that has held them is because they loved one another. And in all these new experiences, and now like we've already heard, this is a new experience for Edna to be a widow. It's a new experience for her children to be fatherless. But this is life. It's life. And there's just one breath between life and death. One breath. We often hear that. He took his last breath. Just that little fine line. And life is compared, is long or short by comparison. And Paul tells us that life is just a moment compared to eternity. And that's what makes it so serious, how we live. And I just have thought a lot about people that we read about in the scripture. It's like the Bible is like a lot of little autobiographies, just telling the most important thing in life. And there are two things that are outstanding to me about Bruce and Edna. Like we've already heard, he was a student. He didn't just read the Bible, but he studied the Bible. And that place there at the table, and I've seen him time and again, early in the morning before he went to work. He was studying. He had a good light. He had reference books, the dictionaries and concordances within his reach, and he studied. Because it's the Bible that tells us how to live. And he needed to know that. He wanted to know that. And the other thing that has been impressive to me is that when anyone new came to the community, there was one thing he felt they needed to know. And that was early on, when this country was settled, and people came and settled, and there were those of different walks of life. And along with them came the teachers of the Bible. The servants of God came. And they have that story. When those servants of God came and taught them about the Bible, most important thing in life. And we appreciate those that have care for the soul, those who care, and that we ourselves care for our soul. I'm reading about some of these people that were so useful to God here, and we read about in the Bible, useful to God and useful in their day. They weren't perfect. None of us are perfect. And new experiences in life, with families, raising children, like we've often heard, they don't come with a manual. And it's an experience for parents, new parents, to raise children. But even though those that I read about in the Bible made mistakes, but God didn't discount them. He just kept on teaching and helping. And I read about Moses, it says he was very, very meek beyond anyone else in his day. And the first thing he did was to go out and kill a man. But God called him my servant Moses. David made mistakes. We all make mistakes. But God works with us and helps us. So I'm thankful for those that have lived and left examples for us. I'll just mention this yet, that last night we drove through Amarillo on 287. And you know how it is. There's a signal light at every block. But if you hit it right, sure, the lights are all red ahead, but if you start out right, they'll turn green every time. And it's just kind of a thrill. And I think of that with life. A lot of times the lights are all red ahead, but with God as our guide and our help, we go forward. And just thinking about Edna, perhaps most of the lights look red right now, but with faith in God, they'll turn green. And we just go forward. And I'd like to think that from this day that we could take something that would increase faith in our hearts in what God has planned for purpose for all mankind, and we would be willing to fit into it.
Many years ago in 1947, a 12-year-old boy went to a ranch near Las Vegas, New Mexico, and there was a simple church convention there, and that boy made a choice to serve God. And probably like most 12-year-olds, he didn't know what all that would mean. But anyway, he wanted God in his heart. And anyway, it's just, to me, a great comfort like today that there were probably ups and downs. But anyway, that choice, he didn't realize at the time maybe that it even was an eternal choice or would have eternal consequences. And so it's just a wonderful thing that, like the testimony of Bruce, it began many years ago just with a desire that God would live in his heart. But then I just appreciated thinking that time went on, and like we were already hearing, he and Edna marrying, and just the desire not only to have God in his own heart, but to have God in his own home, and trying to live that for many years. And Edna mentioned that they've been married 65 years, and for 64 of those years, they've had a meeting in their home. And when those that love God would come together and to exhort one another and to encourage one another and to thank their God for his sacrifice, and for 64 years. And that even to the end, that was really what he considered the greatest privilege of his life. So that's quite a thing. So I like that comes a time when we welcome God hopefully into our heart, and then to welcome God into our home, and how that would affect how we live and how we think, and just that there'd be, again, that of a young couple and just making a home and trying to have a home for one another, and then with time for a home for children, a home for friends, a home for family, home for grandchildren, a place for a meeting, just a safe environment for all those things, and then even welcoming the ministry into their home, and just a wonderful thing, a home, and a home that he would have cared for and maintained. But then I just thought, like 2 weeks ago, Sunday, he left that home for the last time, and a home that you might say he worked, that had protected him from the heat and the cold and the wind and the snow and the rain and whatever would come, and just a little place to shut out the world. Like we heard, a place to study the Bible. It had been home, wonderful place, but the time came to leave it. And really, in how it comes with age, he had no more to offer home, and home had no more to offer him. But I just appreciated this little thought that, like the day came last Friday, that like God said, you've had a place in your heart for me, and now I have a place in my heart for you. And it's a wonderful thing when you go to a home and they're expecting you, but it's even more special when they're already opening the door. And I thought, wouldn't that be wonderful if that was God? Like maybe the day came when the first time Bruce felt a knock on his heart, but to realize, like when the end of life comes, that you don't have to knock on heaven and say, can I come in? But how special if God says, well, the door's open and I'm waiting. And a wonderful thing. And I was, last week, was texting some of the family and just asking how things stood. And it was Friday evening and later, and obviously the end wasn't so far away. Of course, no one knows. And I just liked the little text that Sherry sent, and she mentioned that she was there, and she said, I'm holding his hand. And the more I thought about that, anyway, that was just my thought for today, of our hands. And like the things in life that Bruce enjoyed and that he did, maybe sometimes we don't always enjoy, but like that there would have been a time that like those hands held a mother's hand, or maybe just a finger, and later would have held the father's, and would have held brothers, a sister, and kids walk together, hold your hands, be safe, and you do that, and then the day would have come that you, for the first time ever, you hold a pencil or something in your hand to write with, and you make a very, maybe somebody begins to teach you an alphabet, and not very pretty, but it's like everybody has a beginning. And so for even people that are the best at anything, there was a time then when they did it for the very first time. And I thought we were hearing about him reading and having those, there was a time when Bruce didn't know how to read, all of us. And yet, like, he learned to read, and then how did he use that? And I was just glad to think, like, the modern age, we don't write hardly anymore, we text. And Bruce, of course, not breathing so well. And just, I looked back, and the last word that he wrote me, I just said, I hope you're doing a little bit better. And the day before, he'd written like a whole sentence. And that day, it was just 6 little letters, and it said, thanks. Thanks. Well, that's a great way to end life. Thanks. And so anyway, those little letters that you learn for the first time. And you can't write them very good, but how does that turn out in life? And I thought he liked to play the guitar, and there was some point in life when he plucked a string for the first time, and no doubt it didn't sound very good, but something inside liked it, and he kept touching, and later he could play. But to think there was a day when he couldn't, and that hands that worked on a farm, and hands that took care of the yard, and hands that with time, maybe the first time to pick up a wrench, and what is it? And yet with time, that could be a mechanic. And anyway, hands that would comfort children, hands that would correct children, hands that would protect. And but anyway, I just thought, like the way Sherry wrote it, and just reading into that, it's like it was the real truth. It didn't say we are holding hands. There's a time that comes that this hand really can't respond like it maybe did. And but I thought maybe to hold a hand, it's like a miniature hug, and sometimes that's all you can do is just hold their hand. And I thought it was a hand that's private, maybe for the first time, and I don't know if it was boldness or fear that he held Edna's hand first time. And there was also a last. And a hand when he held his children's hand first time. Little girl, little boy, hands, and a last. And first time to hold a Bible. And don't know when it was, but there was a last time. Just put the Bible down. It'll never be picked up again. But anyway, I was thinking too of Jesus. It's interesting, hands, when you look in the Bible, it's one of the more, I don't know, it says God's a spirit, but we read a lot about the hands of God. And you think of all the things that the hands of Jesus did, that they broke bread for 5,000, and no one else would touch a leper, those hands would. And hands that had anointed the eyes of the blind, and hands that had touched the ears of the deaf and made them to hear, and hands that had touched withered hands, and hands that had drawn little children to himself and blessed them, and hands that they overturned tables and with a whip sent away the animals. Serious hands, but comforting hands. And I just thought the world thought they won. Those hands, they nailed still. Those hands can't move. Those hands are done. And the best, kindest hands that have ever been in the history of mankind. And the world said, stop them, nail them. And there they were, nailed to a cross. And it's just nice. He just, his hands were limited. He didn't try to use any power that he had to escape. But he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And he knew that the hands of God weren't stopped. They were not stopped. Maybe his hands the world hated. All the good they had done, the world didn't respect. But God's hands weren't stopped. So I'm just thankful today, like what we trust in is the hands of God. And the hands of man, strong as they are, talented as they may be at one time or another, there reaches a point they can do no more. Do no more, just be held, just passive, held. Not holding, but held, passive. And but just very thankful today that the hand of God, it's an active hand. And it's not limited, it's not shortened. And anyway, it's the hand that can still hold us, the hand that'll still guide us, and a hand that's holding open a door for Bruce. It's a wonderful thing. Now we're going to ask Sherry to read an obituary on behalf of the family.
Levester Bruce Bassett, Dad, Pappy, of Happy, Texas, passed away November 26th, 2021. He was 86 years of age. Bruce was born on July 9th, 1935, to Rosetta and Leslie Bassett of Edgewood, New Mexico. He attended schools in Stanley, Edgewood, and graduated in May of 1953 from New Mexico's Moriarty High School. Bruce was the 8th grade valedictorian of his class and a baseball pitcher for the Moriarty High School Pintos. He went undefeated his entire high school career and received calls to join the major leagues. He declined and began working for his uncle Ray Bassett at Bassett's Bean Company before going on to Alamogordo, New Mexico, to work at Holloman Air Force Base. There he met and married Edna Bryan of Happy, Texas. They were married July 6th, 1956. In 1957, they moved to Edna's parents' family farm near Happy, Texas, where he successfully farmed for 27 years. In 1978, Bruce was awarded top producer in the region by the DeKalb Seed Company, and he was featured in one of their commercials. Mom and Dad's move to Texas began the expansion and education of our family. Shireen especially remembers the instilling of a tremendous work ethic. By the age of 10, each of his children were driving tractors. We had also tried ice cream covered in instant coffee, chocolate syrup, malt, wheat germ, and Nestle Quick Powder. He taught us to bust hay bales, to haul pipe, to use a siphoning tube, 4 different ways to pitch a baseball, play ping pong, and to care for a wide variety of animals, especially swine. Bruce raised registered Poland China spots. He taught us to shoot a gun, to weld, milk cows, drive in the mud, and mow, and mow, and mow. We learned to be good stewards of the land. Under Edna's direction, Dad was a master gardener. He simply never applied for the certificate. Teddy remembers how Dad loved to swim and made sure that we all learned. He loved driving us to Amarillo to spend time at the pool. He never sat on the sidelines. He was right there swimming with us. We learned to saltwater fish. There is a difference. And what it meant to have a good breakfast. Lacey remembers eggs, bacon, and silly-faced pancakes. And how Pap always told us, slow down, you're going to get the croup. Our home was filled with music. Bruce played 6 musical instruments that we are aware of: piano, guitar, fiddle, banjo, accordion, and harmonica, all without learning to read music. His love for watching the weather had him climbing the windmill at all hours of the night. In 1984, Bruce became employed at West Texas A&M University here in Canyon, where he worked for 34 years. There wasn't a small engine within reach that he couldn't repair. He retired in April of 2018 at the age of 83. Dad was a patriot. He loved this country. And he grew to claim Texas as his home. He proudly flew both flags. He faithfully and willingly prepared for and hosted baptisms for over 35 years. This past year, while struggling with his health, he made sure to host one more time. Bruce was preceded in death by a daughter, Sylvia Marie Bassett, a son, Arnold Brian Bassett, and a grandson, Drew Timothy Fremel. Also his parents, Leslie and Rosetta Bassett, 2 brothers, Edgar Bassett and Sanford Bassett, and a sister, LaRue Myers. He is survived by his wife of 65 years, Edna Bassett of the home. 2 daughters, Shireen Davis and husband Edwin of Happy, Sherry Fremel and Blake of Amarillo, 1 son, Teddy Bassett and wife Peggy of Amarillo, daughter-in-law Susan Bassett of Phoenix, Arizona. 6 grandsons, Jeremiah Davis and wife Carolyn of Auburn, Alabama, Colby Davis of Amarillo, Jackson Davis of Canyon, Chandler Bassett and wife Jennifer of Spring, Texas, Dylan Fremel of Amarillo, and Garrett Fremel of Lubbock. 5 granddaughters, Lacey Bethke and husband Brett of Dimmitt, Texas, Amy Bassett and fiancé Will Crooks of Denver, Colorado, Shayna Francis and husband Michael of New River, Arizona, Ashley Bassett of Amarillo, and Katasha Bassett and David of Amarillo. Pap loved going to air shows and discussing the significant planes and novelties of each. He loved history. Jeremiah commented that Pap spent many hours in the barn and in the garden, patiently explaining all the answers to his many whys. One of Pap's special talents was getting babies to smile with the click of his tongue. We've all tried to outclick him. He's also survived by 4 great-grandchildren, Elisha Dobson of Amarillo, Autumn Bethke, Bodie Bethke, and Aubrey Bethke of Dimmitt. Our family would like to extend a special note of appreciation to Eddie Bryan. As Dad began to slow down, unable to do as he once did, Eddie graciously helped with yard work. But more importantly, he sat with our dad and simply visited. Immediately following burial, everyone is invited to join our family at Hugo's on the Square here in Canyon for a potluck-style meal and fellowship. A special thank you to Larry and Linda Allen for organizing the food. Due to a parade on the square later this evening, parking will be limited, but Brooks is graciously allowing us to remain parked here. And there's plenty of parking behind Hugo's. Sidewalks are available to walk around. We are grateful for the life of Lester Bruce Bassett, husband, best friend, dad, and pappy. May he rest in well-deserved peace. tinkering and pickering forevermore.
I think you, in your memorial card, you will have this hymn, With the Lord. And the men in back will lead for us, but this is congregational singing. So if you would like, in closing, this will close our service here. We'll sing this.